in 1 second. All right. So welcome everyone. Today, we're just doing a facilitator talk or a facilitator discussion. This is not going to be what we would call a training. I think to be trained as a facilitator in any amount or any capacity, it would require more than 2 hours. So this is really just an introduction to get some wheels spinning and some gears turning if you're interested in facilitating our 10-step program. So the first hour to an hour and a half will be going over this presentation, and then the end will allow some time for some questions and answers. This will be the last time that we're doing this presentation. And from moving forward, we'll make this presentation publicly available and then just hold space monthly for some Q&As so people can come together and ask questions, let us know what works, what doesn't work, and we'll continue the dialogue moving forward in that way. So I'm Laura Schmidt. I am the co-founder of the Good Grief Network. My other co-founder is Amy Lewis-Rowe, and I'll talk a little bit about her in a second and how we came to this work and why we do this work. But I'm so grateful you all are joining us and you're interested in this program. And I know a few of you on this call have actually participated in the program, and so I'm really grateful to see that you're wanting to step up and maybe bring it home to your community as well. So thank you for joining us. We're going to get started. Oh, all right. So what is the Good Grief Network? It's founded by just the two of us, me and Amy, and it's a pretty small scale organization. We only have 2 people. So if you notice that I'm a little slow to respond with emails, it's because we're getting a lot of them. And we currently moved to rural Tucson, north of Tucson, Arizona in the United States, and don't have any internet access. So basically have some compassion for us. We're trying to put out this work into the world and not always exactly timely about it. And so I'm sorry in advance, but I feel very passionately about this work, and I'm really grateful that people want to be starting to move through heavy emotions and really come out on the other end in an action-oriented way. So Good Grief Network has been around for almost 3 years now, and it started, I'll explain on the next slide a little bit more about me, but grief is only one feeling. It's not the encompassing feeling. There's rage and anger to a lesser degree. There's despair, hopelessness. There are many feelings that are probably provoked when we understand the severity of the predicament we're facing globally. And so grief is just one feeling, but we thought it was pretty punny. And our idea is that what comes from embodying the full emotional aspect of these tough emotions and coming out on the other side is good. Our culture really tries to tell us not to feel and not to dig deep, especially for these scary emotions. And so we wanted to have a name that really embodied the power behind feeling these heavy emotions. So that's us in a nutshell. Amy Lewis-Rowe could not be here today. Since we're in the process of moving and settling, it's been a couple of weeks, but we're still getting settled and trying to orient ourselves. So I'll be flying solo today, but I'm sure throughout this work, you'll get an opportunity to meet her. All right, so why do I do this work? A little bit about me. I have a little outline over here to the left, but really the idea here is I grew up in a highly dysfunctional family. Both parents were addicts and alcoholics. And so my safe space really was the natural world. And I grew up really loving all of the animals around me and really wanting to understand how they worked. I watched shows like Krat's Creatures and a lot, like any of the documentaries I could find about the natural world, and it became my solace. And I ended up majoring in biology and environmental studies and religion as an undergrad, and that's when I first read the IPCC in 2009, and I understood the implications then. So I'm still relatively new to this work. There have been people doing this work a lot longer than I have. And I'm so grateful because this work wouldn't exist without them. And really what happened was I was feeling this eco-anxiety or grief long before 2009, but 2009 and reading that report really put it in context. You know, the world's on fire and no one's really wanting to take this problem seriously. None of our political leaders are taking it seriously. So I sort of made it my life mission to try to help get people on board. How are we going to fix this climate crisis, especially if no one's wanting to talk about it? And what ended up happening was in my graduate program, a mentor of mine said, "You're asking the wrong question. Never in the history of social movements has anyone or has 100% of the population bought into this new idea. And so if you're trying to wake people up to what climate change is, you're asking the wrong question." So I changed my question, my focus to, okay, if people are wanting to look at these problems, then how can we sustain them? How can we sustain the people who want to continuously look at these difficult things? And so I did a tremendous amount of research. I did interviews with scientists, activists, teachers, people who were on the ground looking at climate change, and then put these themes together with what I knew from my own healing journey, having come from an abusive childhood. And so I am a proud member of Adult Children of Alcoholics, and it's a 12-step program that uses the same format as Alcoholics Anonymous. I noticed the healing that takes place in those rooms, and so what I did was structure a preliminary program based off of the best aspects, or what I believe to be the best aspects of Al-Anon or AA or Adult Children of Alcoholics. So I really enjoyed the community aspect of it. I enjoyed the ritual. You know, you come, they always read the same intro, they always read the same closing, and you get to start the conversation at a different level. We're all here for the same reason. So I took those aspects of what I thought worked from AA and tried to form a program around it that helps people manage their eco-anxiety or grief or rage, you know, these heavy feelings that we're told are not okay to feel. So yeah, created the initial program in my graduate studies and kind of shelved it for a little while. I put it on a shelf and said, I have a job at an environmental nonprofit, I'm doing enough. And then realized that we're not doing enough. We need action and we need it right now. But before we jump into action, we have to learn how to calm our nervous systems. So we got the program back out. Amy told me she'd help me lead it. And we did a few pilot programs, mostly in Salt Lake City, got very positive feedback from it, and have been expanding since. And so we've actually been moving a lot because of these opportunities to try to expand the program. So we moved from Salt Lake to a small community in Nebraska where one of our supporters basically didn't charge us rent for 1.5 years, so we could really dig into this work and quit our full-time jobs. And now we're down near Tucson, Arizona. Amy's sister is about to have a baby, and most of our work is done digitally. So we want to be here to support family and then continue to build the network. And our primary focus moving forward will be less of having me and Amy facilitate digital groups or even in-person groups, and more empowering you folks to bring this program to your home and practice it with your community. So that's a little bit about me, how I came to this work, what I do, how the network started, and whatnot. All right, so I really like memes, and I'm flipping through them quickly because my mouse is sensitive. So the idea here with the last quote and this quote is, do what you can with what you have where you are. I somehow got it in my mind that because I knew about the severity of the predicament, that it was on me and only me to solve the world's problems, and that's a lot of pressure. And so this program really serves as a reminder that we can do what's in our reach, and it's not on us to save the world. It's on us to impact our community, to impact ourselves, to do our work, and then show up outwardly, but you are not expected to save the world. And so for those of you who were like me and really felt that pressure, please just take a breath and realize that you know, you only have a small arena of control, but this program is a grassroots movement in the truest form. So you're doing your part where you are, with what you have, how you can do it, and it starts with you and building community. And next page. I really like memes, so you'll see a couple of them pop up, but it's two people laying together in bed, and one person says, "Whisper to me," and the other person says, "Whisper what?" "I don't know, anything." And so the person is thinking and whispers over, civilization is inherently unsustainable and will always collapse. So some gallows humor, I think, is always appreciated, especially as we're talking about really intense feelings and the state of the world and unprecedented suffering. So thank you for bearing with me with these memes, but I think it helps. All right, why Good Grief Network? So the program that Amy and I have created, I think, has a lot of strengths. And we're not the only program doing this kind of work. In fact, I think that we're kind of a base program that really helps people break down the constructions of what they aren't and helps empower them to figure out who we are as individuals, where our power lies, helps us uncover our strengths and our passions so that we might go do that work in the world. The strengths of this program are really that it's peer-to-peer. We tried to take away the hierarchical structure out of it, and meaning you don't have to be a therapist to facilitate this work. In fact, it's somewhat of a stronger program if you're not a therapist, because then you don't want to be put into the role as a therapist. The point being is that you're here showing up as a human being with your experiences, with your passions, and you're here to help other people move through these tough feelings. So again, we take away the hierarchy. It's helpful if you're a therapist. You don't have to be, you don't have to have an expertise. You really just have to learn how to sit with people. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. Because we have a 10-step program, we have a new topic every week. And so the steps serve as guideposts or a bit of direction to orient the conversation. Every week you're talking about new things. And yet it's still just a space for people to come and open their hearts and start the process of kind of deconstructing the modes and models that have been put on us. It invites ongoing process work. So we'll talk a little bit more about what process work is, but it means that we go to this meeting maybe once a week, but the work doesn't end there. You have to integrate it into your life. You have to let it change you. Another aspect of the Good Grief Network is that we help build community. There's a lot of isolation, especially in feeling these heavy feelings and in not knowing what to do with such a large scale predicament. And this allows us a safe space to say, like, I'm really hopeless. I'm feeling a lot of despair, or, I experienced this really cool thing and I wanted to share it. It gives you a safe space to check in with people who are also concerned about these issues. We offer tools and techniques. The tools and techniques are a 10-step program. And so each one is a different aspect of opening yourself up or becoming more comfortable with your feelings, with your internal world, with your emotions. And then you turn that externally. We exist in an emotionally stunted culture. I don't think I have to tell you folks that. If you're here, you already kind of know that this is not our culture at large is not a safe space to talk about these heavy feelings and our worries. And Good Grief offers an opportunity for us to connect and to really see people at a heart level. It reminds us to live in the present moment. Our step 3 is about practice sitting with uncertainty, or practice being with uncertainty. And the idea is that we don't know what the future holds. We might have some ideas, we might have some projections about what the future holds, but ultimately we're living in such an uncertain and dynamic world. And this program is an invitation to live in the moment, to live your values and your morals, and show up how you want to be living in this time and place. Another really great benefit is that it's scalable. We've designed a program that you can bring to your community and practice it in community, however that means for you. So we have a script, we have some things that people can follow if they'd like, and we'll talk about this in a second, but you can also change it. If the structure that we've created does not suit your community, then feel free to change it. And use tools and techniques that will help your community, because ultimately you know your community better than Amy and I do. So it also applies to everyone. That's the same idea as being scalable. So another meme, a few of us are going out after work to pretend it's not the end of the world. If you want to join us, if only our workplaces really let us talk like that, right? All right, so the 10-step program. Some of you have been introduced to it. Some of you have worked the program with me and Amy. And then others of you, this might be brand new. So I'm just gonna take a minute or two and explain each of the steps. The first thing that I want to make you aware is that, like the planet, like our cultural situation, we see this program as being dynamic. We are not tied to the wording of the steps or even the order of the steps. We have changed a few of the steps through time. And so every time that we make big change, we'll name a new version of the manual. So we're currently in our third version of our manual, our third version of the way our steps are. And we'll continue to allow it to evolve as our world evolves around us, because we want this to be applicable to the world. Otherwise, it's not helpful in any capacity. So step one, accept the severity of the predicament. Now, the idea here is that we're probably all in different levels of accepting the severity of the predicament. And as a facilitator, you don't have to push your ideas off onto anyone else. Instead, it's an invitation for everyone to come where they are with their understanding of how bad things are. And the first step is often really difficult to start on. That's one of the major pieces of feedback that we've gotten, is because we're just asking people to sink right in. We don't know each other. It's a really scary topic. And so we'll talk about in a little bit creating expectations and norms and things of that nature to help create that safe container, so we're not putting people in despair and then leaving them for the first meeting. But the first one is really hard. You know, it's what research have you been doing to come to these conclusions? What have you been paying attention to? Are you really involved in reading the news? Perhaps take a break from that. Step two, acknowledge that I'm a part of the problem and the solution. So this one came to us because it's incredibly important to know that if we're going to be standing up for any type of change, we have to understand how we're both complicit and complacent in the problem. We are in of this culture, and so it makes sense that I have an iPhone. And, you know, it makes sense that I'm sitting here in a public library that I drove my car to. And once we can really come to terms with how we're perpetuating the cycles that we feel stuck in, then the less shame we have associated with them. So this step also is part of, you know, if you're an activist and you go to a rally and fossil fuel companies say like, well, how'd you get here? Did you drive your car here? Like, yeah, we did. But also, how is my message going to reach you if I allow every hypocrisy to stop me from reaching out and to make change? This is also a step where we talk about the neoliberal idea that the onus of all these troubles and these problems are on the individual. It's not. They're systemic problems. They're far beyond the systems we have set up for individual change. And so that needs to change. And when we can become comfortable with the idea that we're part of the problem and the solution, it's going to be easier to change and push for cultural change. But we have to know that the system is set up to make us sort of feel like we don't have much agency. Step three, practice sitting with uncertainty. I just spoke about this a second ago, but this is an invitation to really take a look around you at your life and realize that we were never planned or we were never guaranteed certainty to begin with. It was an illusion all along. And so for those of us in the United States with our American dream, I mean, it's pretty much shit. The American dream is dead. We were promised that if we got the right education and you make enough money and you can buy your white picket fence, then you won't get sick. You won't have accidents happen. And that's just a fallacy. We can throw that out the window because that has never really been true. And yes, we can, you know, have healthcare if you're lucky enough to have health insurance, and we can try to make smart decisions to minimize that risk and that uncertainty. But ultimately, we're living in a dynamic world, one where we drive, many of us drive every day, you know, and if you're biking, that's a risk. You know, the idea here is that to be alive is to have a certain amount of uncertainty in your life, and we have to be able to sit with that. Step four. Honor my own mortality and the mortality of all. When we first started this program, this step was missing. We added it after we did one pilot program and realized that if we could not talk about our own fear of death and what it means to be here for a finite amount of time, especially as we're seeing many species go extinct all around us and we're seeing a lot of suffering in mass, that this whole program is not going to be helpful. We have to be able to understand that we're finite beings here for a finite amount of time, And what does that do to your nervous system? How does that make you feel? Because I think that it can bring a certain amount of peace if we're understanding that we'll die and we're only here for a short amount of time. So don't we want to show up in the most meaningful way possible? Step 5, do inner work. This step is twofold. One, it wants you to embrace your whole range of human emotion. Western culture tells us that we're only supposed to pursue what makes us happy. And Amy and I disagree. We think that we have this whole range of feelings and we should learn to embrace all of them. That means rage and despair and hopelessness, along with joy and love and all the other happy feelings. Because if we start to mute sadness and our despair, then it really mutes the good ones. The good ones, that's a judgment. I don't want to say the good ones. I'm going to take that back. If we mute the ones that are heavy and feel difficult, then we mute the ones that we really enjoy feeling. And so it's an invitation to really explore our full range of feelings and to become comfortable sitting with them and in them. The second part is that if you're alive in this time and place, you probably have some trauma. All of us as adults have trauma in one way or another, and this is an invitation to really work through that trauma. Now, this program is not a therapy program, and so if your trauma is very big, as mine was, you might have to get an outside healer, whether that's a therapist or a healer of a different sort. That's up to you and whatever modality you want to pursue. But the idea is that if you are carrying around a lot of unresolved trauma, as we're continuing to face an uncertain future that we know will encounter more suffering and we'll see a lot more pain, that exacerbates the trauma that already exists. So this is an invitation for you, if you have the time and space, to really do that inner work, to show up with your whole range of feelings and then also work through that trauma. Step 6, develop awareness of brain patterns and perception. Amy really likes to call this the permission to be wrong step, because we start to talk about our cognitive biases. We start to talk about how our brain, although it's really brilliant, it's programmed to take shortcuts. And oftentimes those shortcuts can do us a disservice, especially when we're looking at a big, all these systemic problems or the predicament. And so it's the permission to be wrong step, because you understand that once you learn that your brain is wired to take these shortcuts, you can be more forgiving of yourself. You can learn how your brain is literally telling you the wrong thing. It's pretending that you're rational, but we're not really that rational. Step 7, practice gratitude. And along with gratitude, it's look for beauty and meaning along the way. This is a really big tool for your tool belt moving forward, because as long as we can teach our brains to practice gratitude, to practice mindfulness, meditation, those sorts of things, it actively gets us out of our reptilian brain and calms our nervous system and allows us to move into our prefrontal cortex, which is a space for collaboration and creativity. And it's a space in our brain that's capable of holding nuance. And this is the place that we really want to be operating from while moving forward in a dynamic world, in an uncertain world. So practicing gratitude, finding beauty and meaning, practicing martial arts, meditation, these are all types of tools that we're going to need going forward. Step 8, take breaks and rest. This is the permission to just take a break. Like most of the time in this culture, we're not granted that permission. And so we needed to have a step about it. How are you taking a break? How are you restoring yourself? This work is going to be a lifetime long of work. And so if you just keep pushing forward, you're going to burn out, and we need you. And so just learn to do self-care, and not the sort of fun, popular self-care. Like learn how to really restore yourself and step away if you need a moment away. Step 9 follows that, which is show up. And show up means a few different things. 1, show up for yourself. Be authentic. Be vulnerable. Be you. But in addition to that, know when you need to show up for you and what things will be restorative for you. And so sometimes that might mean missing an event that you would normally go to just because you felt obligated to go. You're showing up for yourself by not going, by skipping that event. So steps 8 and 9 are really about self-care and learning to restore yourself and be present with you and showing up from that place, from that capacity. And then step 10 is reinvest into meaningful efforts. So this is our action step. And we at the Good Grief Network feel that it's incredibly important not to prescribe action for you. And as a facilitator, we would love for you to not prescribe action to the people in your community, because what we want people to do is find their experience, find that hot spot where their experiences and their skills and their passions meet up, and empower them to make change from that place. And as a facilitator, I don't feel comfortable telling people what their place should be. They need to discover that for themselves. So in a nutshell, this is the 10-step program. We work 1 step a week for 10 weeks. Always a new subject, as we discussed. And let's move into talking a little bit more about what it's like to facilitate, or suggestions for facilitation. The important thing to know about this slide, and one of our organizers shared it on our Facebook a little while ago, and I don't know who it is, so I can't cite who created this, but the idea here is that for many of us, especially in the Western world, we've been in our comfort zone for a long time. We haven't experienced a lot of suffering, we haven't witnessed a lot of suffering, and so now climate change and the other systemic issues that are all rearing their heads right now, they're pushing us into our fear zone. And this is where our nervous systems are getting really activated. It's where we're experiencing a lot of fear and uncertainty, and we don't know how to sit with this. And so most of the people who will be in your program, who will be meeting with you, will be in this fear zone. So it's oftentimes helpful to be mindful of the fact that many of the people that are coming to you are coming because they're suffering. Because they don't know what to do next. They lack self-confidence, they lack empowerment. And so it's our goal to take them from that fear zone into growth zone. And I don't know who these terms are from, but I think the point is the same, is we want people to be able to set new goals. We want to help empower people that even though the world is uncertain and there will undoubtedly be more suffering moving forward, that we can learn how to calm ourselves, and we have new tools and techniques that will help us as we fall back into despair. Because once we feel despair and work the program, it's not like you're never going to feel the despair again. You're never going to feel the hopelessness. These feelings will be reoccurring. But what happens is we learn how to manage them. We learn how to feel them. We learn how to take the wisdom that these feelings are teaching us and move forward. And that's the aim as a facilitator, is to really help people move from that fear zone to the growth zone. All right. And we spoke a little bit earlier about what process work is. And process work just means it's ongoing. It means that you don't go to a meeting once a week for an hour and a half or 2 hours and then you're fixed and you're never going to feel these feelings again. Instead, process work is an invitation to take the things we've spoken about in our meetings and take it back to your home life and to integrate it with how you see the world. And process work means you have to do it. It doesn't mean that you can sit in a circle and listen to everybody else talk about their process and where they're at, and then you never do anything. It really is an invitation for you to do your work. It's not easy, and a lot of times it's not even fun, but it is meaningful and it is rewarding. We work on this at home or wherever you go after the meeting. You need to integrate this work. And so, whether it's incorporating it into your meditation practice or however you want to do this process work, you need to work on it individually. You, as a human, your own person, need to work on it. It's ongoing. It's never finished. So even if you finish the 10 steps and you think you're done, the process work is always ongoing. And so you use the 10 steps as guides moving forward. You remind yourself, oh, I have to do my inner work. Oh, I have to be comfortable with uncertainty. Oh, yes, this is spiking my death anxiety. I have to sit with my death anxiety. And so it's ongoing. From this point forward, you should always be doing process work, which sounds exhausting, but that's why we create the space in our lives to take a break. And however that means for you, whether that's spending time in nature or making sure you're getting enough sleep at night, eating properly, those kinds of things matter. And we'll talk about that in a second as well. All right. So with a facilitator talk, I just wanted to bring up some things that aren't required and things that are required. Of course, this is not an all-inclusive list. I'm sure there are things that I've missed. But what I want you to know is that You are not required to know the solution. You are not required to know the way out of this predicament as a facilitator. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to have the answers for everything. Instead, you can be humble. You can have humility and just express to the people who are sitting with you that it's a scary time to be alive and we're all in this together. And the genius that emerges from the group is much more powerful than our individual brains. You don't have to fix people. In fact, I'll talk about this in a second, but the expectations and norms that you set your group up with pretty much says that people have to be doing their own work. If they need a therapist, they have to find a therapist. You know, if they need additional work through a privatized one-on-one interaction, that's really on that person, that participant, to find that help. You don't have to fix them. You as a facilitator have to sit with them and hold space for them, but you don't have to fix them. I also put giving people hope, and I felt a little uncomfortable putting this in here, but I think it's important to know that we can't pass our hope on to other people, and our hope might look different than other people. So people have to earn their own hope. They have to come out on the other side and see what's worth working for, what's worth changing, and find hope through that. You don't have to relay your own personal hope to someone else. In fact, I think it might be doing that person a disservice if you try to do that. And then finally, you're not required to have expertise in just about anything. You don't have to be a therapist. You don't have to be an economist. You don't have to be a social science researcher. All those things are helpful if you have those kinds of people in your group because it'll further the dialogue. But really what you're trying to do is create an open and honest dialogue. That's a space for vulnerability, which brings us over to the other side of what is required. You have to have an open heart and an open mind. People are going to bring up things in circle that you might be uncomfortable with, and you have to sit with that. You don't have to fix them. You just have to sit with them. You have to meet people where they are. Humility, as we talked about a second ago, is important because no one knows the right way to go about doing any of this moving forward. What does it look like to completely deconstruct our culture and create a new one? What does it look like to sit with the idea that we're going to see greater storms, that we're going to see more droughts, we're going to see more flooding, we're going to see sea level rise? Courage. You all are expressing courage as you're showing up to this meeting and being interested to even facilitate this work. We just need courage because in a path that is really dark and we don't have a light to guide us and to show us where we need to go, then it's on us to exhibit courage. It's to show up even though we're scared, even if we're scared, to show up and not let that fear win, to not let our nervous systems dictate how we spend our time. Discernment. I think discernment is a skill. And as you do this work, and many of you have expressed that you've facilitated other things, and so your skills of discernment are probably better and have been improving. But the idea here is what's important, what's not important, how are you showing up? You know, to what level are you making these decisions and showing up in your own world, in your own life, in your community? Compassion. Compassion is huge because, again, these people that you're going to be meeting with are suffering. We're all scared and we don't know what to do. And so if you can just sit with them in a time of need and not try to fix them, but really witness their journey and who they are as a person, that changes people. And then, of course, curiosity and integrity. Curiosity because what emerges in the group can often be fun. Or someone will mention a resource you've never even heard before. You know, this isn't a time for learning. It's a time for gathering resources. It's a time for really exploring different ways of being in the world. And then integrity, show up with who you are, how you are, be vulnerable, you know, but just be you. You know, you don't have to be anybody in particular, just be you and be you with integrity. All right, so some meeting logistics. If you purchase our manual, we do have a few suggestions for meetings, and this is right from that list. And so the first thing is that Amy and I are not mental health experts, and you don't have to be either. That's why we call it a peer-to-peer support network. We're just trying to come together. We're concerned citizens trying to move through some really heavy feelings. So we're not therapists. You don't have to be either. Right from the get-go, you want to identify which model you want to do. And we've done 2 different types of models. So one is that we have 15 people sign up right at the beginning, and then we carry those 15 people through our 10 steps. Or we allow drop-ins through the whole meeting. That's more of an AA type model. And so you just say, you know, every Monday night from 6 to 8, we're going to be meeting at this place. You're welcome to show up at any time. So those are the 2 models that you're probably going to want to decide. Do we want to carry a whole cohort through, or do we want to advertise that people can drop in at step 6 or drop in when they can come? Another thing that we've learned is that if we charge for attendance, people take the program a bit more seriously. So Amy and I charge $100 for the 10 weeks, which breaks down to $10 per meeting. You don't have to charge. In fact, some of our groups right now are not charging, and that's okay. But, you know, where are you meeting? Does that cost space for you to rent that space, or do you have to pay for that electricity? How are you being compensated for your time facilitating and organizing? Because that takes a lot of time. And then if you do collect money as an honorarium or as a head nod, rather, we suggest that you kick 5% back to us through our PayPal. And this is not mandatory. We're not going to hunt you down and ask you for your 5% if you're collecting money. It really is just a head nod to our program and to keeping us going. So Amy and I have quit our full-time jobs and are really trying to invest our time and energy into building this and our resources. And so if you charge for attendance, that's just why we ask for some help. The next thing that's important is that you have to meet regularly. You don't have to meet every week if that doesn't fit your schedule, but are you meeting every 2 weeks? Are you meeting once a month? And then the other suggestion is that we would like for you to meet for an hour and a half or 2 hours each time. That really allows sufficient time to sink into the feelings and to sink into the discussion. Anything less than that, and it's too fast. You just don't have the proper time to really dig into the conversation, the level of conversation that you would want to be at. So meet regularly and for an hour and a half to 2 hours. Meet at the same location every week. So it could be a coffee shop, it could be a church, it could be your book group, wherever you're meeting, try not to move places. People get really confused. If you're always moving spaces, they're not going to show up. We also suggest limit group size. Part of the power of this program is being in a small group. We've led people through from group sizes of 5 all the way to about 15 to 17 people. And that would be my cap. My suggestion would be about 15 people to cap it there. That way people have enough space to share, they have enough space to open up, and it feels like a safe avenue. So limit your group size. All right, sit in a circle. Amy and I do a lot of facilitating digitally, and so we end up in rooms like this, like Zoom rooms, which makes it quite difficult to sit in a circle. But if you're in real life, you want to be able to see everybody's faces. You also want to minimize crosstalk and practice active listening. So if someone's talking, no one else should be talking. And again, you can create some expectations and norms about how your meetings will run so that, you know, if somebody ends up cutting someone else off, you can talk to that person directly and say like, hey, according to our meeting norms, we are going to practice active listening and we're not going to be cutting people off. You also don't necessarily want people responding directly to what somebody else said. So it's not a discussion. It really is a place to share and minimizing the amount of discussion happening or crosstalk really allows a space for people to share where they're at instead of expecting that people might respond to them in a certain way. Ritual is important. So as I mentioned, what I was really moved by with my experience of ACA is that we always had the same introduction and we always had the same closing. You start to create some norms, and that helps create the safe container. So you know we're going to read the same introduction every week. You know you're going to close out the same way every week, and then that holds the container for your conversation. Some of our models ask other people to lead the meetings each week. We don't really do this with our digital programs because it's a bit too hard, but in real life, we would just ask our circle of people sitting with us, who wants to lead step 2 next week? And then you give them the manual, the introduction, and then they read the step, and they basically, it's empowering your participants to really participate and to be present. And so you can choose to do that, or you can choose not to do that. That's up to you. Make time for check-ins and check-outs each meeting. This is incredibly important. And a check-in and a check-out, even if nobody is forced to share, which I think is on the next slide, you want people to check in and you want people to check out, because then we get an opportunity to really learn who people are and how they're showing up and how they spend their days and where their heart space is. So even if they don't want to share during the actual meeting, it's important that they're checking in with whatever prompt you have. A lot of times we use an easy one, just what are you grateful for? Or what in the past week have you been grateful for? Another check-in we use a lot is what's a peak and a valley from the last week? You know, what's a high and a low? We also ask people to share their first name. We say location because we organize digitally, and preferred pronouns, she, her, hers for me. And then in addition to that, we'd have the actual check-in. So one thing I'm grateful for the last week, and that might be the check-in for the whole meeting, and then everybody takes time doing it. Same thing for the checkout. Another prompt, you know, remind us your name, remind us your preferred pronouns, and then your checkout. So that really helps sandwich the meeting as well, just like the intro and the closing. All right, no requirement to share. I think this is a big one. And I have been in meetings where people force you to share. And as someone who has a lot of anxiety, I don't really appreciate that. I don't think it creates a safe atmosphere. And so other than the check-in and the check-out, I'm not sure we should force people to share at all. Just create that safe space where they can share if they want to. The space is there for them. In our expectations and norms, we say, before anybody shares twice, create space for everybody to share at least once. Before anybody shares twice, create space for people to share once. Don't let people go on for too long. So this is not a place for ranting or for blame, really. What we're trying to do is get people to connect at a heart level, to share where they're at from a heart space. And ranting is not really conducive to that, ranting or blame. And so what we do in our groups is we say, you have 3 minutes to share, and 3 minutes is an arbitrary amount of time. It kind of depends on your group size. But basically what you want to be doing is saying, you have the floor, and everybody's going to listen to you for a certain amount of time. But this is not a space to blame other people for the predicament that we're in. Instead, share where you're at in a heart space. Where are you emotionally? And yeah. So create expectations and norms for all to agree on. If you purchase our manual and use our manual as a format, we'll send you some example expectations and norms that we use. We recommend that you go through it with your group and see if there's anything we missed or that's specific to your own group. But this way it gives everybody accountability. The rules for engagement. If you're going to engage in this program, this is how you're going to show up. And if you don't adhere to our expectations and norms, you may be asked to leave because it's not conducive to the meeting. Branch independence, which is what I was talking about a little earlier, is we have a bare bones structure. We have wording that you can use. We have expectations and norms. But what we want is for you to really take this program and make it work for your own community. And so your community might be different than the one that Amy and I grew up in, or the ones that we know. And so we've had one organizer do a group social following the formal meeting. So they would meet for 2 hours. The meeting would last for an hour and a half. In the last half hour, they would share chips and salsa and chat about life. And so this would really help build community. One that Amy and I ran in real life in Nebraska, we incorporated a 20-minute meditation into it. So we were able to do the meditation right before we opened the step. Some people might want to incorporate movement. As you know, there's only so much feelings can be processed talking about them. We need to move our bodies. And so if you want to incorporate, if you're a yoga teacher, you can incorporate some yoga movements, some walking meditation, some way to get that body moving during the meeting. And then another option, and again, these are not all inclusive. You can have many more ideas than these. These are just suggestions. But another suggestion is to share one resource. If you use our manual, it comes with a lot of resources that I've been putting together for a few years. And so you can focus on a book and do it as a sort of book club. You can focus on a particular article and then chat about that article. Whatever really works for you is brilliant, and we would love for you to take some ownership of it. All right, this is an example flyer from one of our organizers in Salt Lake City. And you can see we've even changed the wording of our program. I was using the term psychosocial, and I was advised not to, that it's too heady and that people won't understand what you're saying. So now we use 10 steps to personal resilience and empowerment in a chaotic climate. Anyhow, you're gonna wanna put a little blurb about what you're meeting about, and you're gonna wanna tell people where to meet, for how long, if they have to pay anything, where to show up. You know, those types of things are incredibly important. And so this is, again, just a sample flyer. And what I'm gonna do is tomorrow or the next day, I will send an email out to you guys when I have this recording put up on YouTube. And so you'll have, and I'll send a PDF of this presentation. So you'll be able to look back on this and use it as an example if that's what you want to do. All right, so as a facilitator, it is essential that you are taking care of yourself. One thing we recommend is that you don't facilitate by yourself, that you find a co-facilitator, some trusted person, a friend, a colleague, a partner, somebody to help you do this kind of work, because you're gonna want some help organizing and facilitating. You're gonna want somebody to check in with after your meeting sometimes. And then also, if you're co-facilitator and you are not that close, I co-facilitate with my wife. So it's really nice and easy after a meeting, we can download together and say like, wow, that meeting went really well. I was really moved by this or this. But it's important for you to have support too. You know, do you have a partner? Do you have a friend? Do you have a family member that you can call if the meetings get really emotionally charged? And in fact, as a facilitator, I would recommend that you ask your participants that same question. Do they have someone to call? Do they have a therapist? Do they have somebody they can process with? Now back to you, self-care. How are you spending your days? Are you moving your body? Are you getting some physical exercise? Are you eating well? Are you spending time in nature? Because all those things help. This work is a lot about emotional processing work. And if you're not taking care of yourself, people are gonna know. It's gonna show up. Another thing, especially for those who are highly sensitive among us, is don't take on the heavy feelings of others. Know which feelings are yours and which feelings are other people's. This will be really essential moving forward. Don't take on their feelings. You have enough of your own. And then we already talked about emotional support, and I think that this is incredibly important. Whether you're a facilitator or a participant, you want to have that emotional support. You want to have somebody that you can connect with if you've had a tough meeting. And the hard stuff. So there are a couple difficult things about being a facilitator. The first thing is cutting people off if they're ranting or if they're going on for a long amount of time. As I mentioned, Amy and I use a 3-minute rule, and we're not too entirely strict with it, but if you tell people ahead of time, we're opening personal sharing for 3 minutes. If you go over, I'll raise my hand just so you have a nonverbal cue to look at. If you go on for 3.5 minutes or 4 minutes, I might stand up. And most people will stop sharing at that point. But there might be a time when you have to cut someone off, and we do it with compassion. We do it with validation. We say, thank you for sharing. And this is really important, but this is not necessarily the place for this conversation. We can have this conversation afterwards if you'd like. So if you have to cut someone off, just be a good human being about it. Be compassionate. You know, somebody is probably going on because they're trying to figure out how they want to say something, and maybe they process as they're talking. Emotional safety. You want to create a container where people want to show up, where people want to be vulnerable, where people want to talk about this tough stuff. And so that means you're going to have to be vulnerable. You're going to invite vulnerability in. And if somebody is not being protective of the group's emotional safety, you might have to ask them to leave. And you can do that in a way where you show them the expectations and norms, or maybe you have the expectations and norms printed out and they're available always for every meeting. And you pull that person aside and say, you know, unfortunately, Amy, you have not been very helpful in creating a safe climate, and we're going to have to ask you to leave. But before that happens, perhaps offer a warning. perhaps go over the expectations and norms and see if there's something that someone doesn't understand about what they're doing. Removing people from meetings is really difficult, and it can be quite painful. But what we've learned is that if you go back to those expectations and norms, you have the rules in your hand. If somebody's not following the rules, you warn them and then ask them to leave. And then reduce your own triggers. All of us have triggers, some more than others, I'm sure. But the idea here is that people are going to bring up tough stuff. And so you have to know your own triggers. You have to know how they're activated. And you also have to know how to work with them and not become triggered if somebody else shares something. And so just be aware of who you are, where you're coming from, where's your headspace, and don't project that onto other people. And I really like this quote because I think that it applies to our culture more generally, but also in this group. As I've mentioned a million times, we're going to be talking about a lot of really hard stuff. And so before you heal someone, ask him if he's willing to give up the things that made him sick. And that's so hard because there are so many conveniences that this culture offers. There are so many illusions that this culture offers, and we're going to be deconstructing a lot of them. And so if people really want to enter in this healing space with you and with us, it's important that they're willing, that they have an open heart and an open mind, and they're willing to look at things in a new way. And I'm not going to read this participant feedback. Y'all can read it if you'd like. But the idea here is that what this program initially does, or one of the easiest things this program does, is build community. It gives people who are struggling alone a place to come together and talk about their heavy feelings and talk about their concerns for the world. And that in itself is so powerful. So even if you don't do the Good Grief Network's 10-step program and you're just meeting weekly or monthly and having hard conversations, that's important, and that's a lot. And so the program specifically, that's what this feedback is. This person says it helps you move from fear to action. And again, we don't prescribe action. We want you to figure out what action is meaningful for you in your life, in your community. But yeah, the idea here is that we're reducing isolation and that we're helping people learn to manage their really heavy feelings. More feedback, feeling of community and a sense of hope. People were feeling stuck before. It's a good place for jumping off for action. I'm gonna cough, sorry. Excuse me. All right. And then I really like this poem, and at times when I feel like I don't know the next step and I don't know what to do, I bring this poem up or other poems. And if you use our manual, we do have suggestions for a few other poems. And I think that poetry is a way of pointing at a non-literal reality. It really helps us sink into the feelings. It helps us get out of that analytical, rational type of brain. So this poem is clearing. Do not try to save the whole world or do anything grandiose. Instead, create a clearing in the dense forest of your life and wait there patiently until the song that is your life falls into your own cupped hands and you recognize and greet it. Only then will you know how to give yourself to this world so worthy of rescue. And then our asks. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this call, we're going to phase out doing this presentation. We're going to make the presentation publicly available for people who want to facilitate. But then what we're going to do is monthly meetings where you guys can come with your questions and I'll answer them, or we can at least work to an answer together. So our ask for this meeting is that we're not asking for your money directly. What we're asking is that you do your own personal work, whatever that means for you. Clearing your trauma, learning to show up as an authentic person. The next important thing is to talk about climate change, to talk about the climate crisis and other systemic issues. If we can't even talk about them, how are we going to start to mitigate them? How are we going to have cultural change if we can't even mention them with the people closest to us? Our next ask, which is why many of you are here, is to start your own branch of this program. We can help you promote it on our social media channels. We can put it into some emails. If you'd like to purchase our manual, our ask is $100. That is for compensation for our time and our energy putting the resources together and creating this manual. Discounted rate is $50 and low income is $25. This is a non-judgmental type situation. You can pay $25, you can pay $100. All of that goes to helping me and Amy cover our bills. Same thing with Patreon. So Patreon is a month-to-month subscription-based. You can donate anything from $1 upwards. And this allows us to really cover our monthly bills, especially as we're continuing to dig deeper into this work and provide resources for you folks. We have an active GoFundMe. Amy and I are doing 2 retreats to really try to help us reorient and build this so to go inward so that we can go outward. Amy already did her retreat. It was at Ghost Ranch 3 weeks ago with Mirabai Starr. She's an author. She just recently published a book called Wild Mercy. And then I'll be doing a warrior training with Margaret Wheatley at the end of this month, also at Ghost Ranch in New Mexico. So if you want to help us get there, if you're really inspired by the work that we've been doing, we'd love for you to throw some money our way to help cover those expenses, because retreats are very expensive and they're not even timely for us, to be honest. It's really bad timing, but we feel really called to be participating in these 2 things. So if you want to help us, please do that. And then another way you can help is to donate resources. I know a lot of people don't like Amazon for a number of reasons, and that's totally fine, but we do have a wish list stored there. It's just the easiest way to put books up there. And we're always trying to read books. We're trying to stay current with the dialogue that's happening. And so if you're interested in helping to support us in that way, that's another option. But again, most importantly, we want you to do your work, and we want you to be normalizing these hard conversations with the people you love in your community and your coworkers. And that's it. So here's my email. It's just laura@goodgriefnetwork.org. Our website is goodgriefnetwork.org. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to open it up to some questions. And all right, so there are a couple different ways we can ask questions. One is that people have used the chat box to ask questions if they want, and then I'll read the question out loud and then I answer it for everyone. The second one is that there is a way to raise your hand. You go down to the participant menu, and you should have that option. And I am available for any questions you might have at this point. And while you folks are forming some questions, I will share some of the web links. All right, I had a question that says, is there a list of people who are leading these in case I wanted to work with somebody who's already leading in my area? And I think that's a really great question. The thing that I would mention to you is we try to capture people's information when they sign up. We try to see where they're coming from. And so what we could do is send an email to a person if they're in your area and ask if they're interested in either attending or co-facilitating. But as of right now, we're a new enough program and a new enough project that we don't actually have something like that set up. So we're continuously evolving, and I think that that's a really brilliant idea. But what's most important to us right now is that we protect people's anonymity and privacy if they're signing up. And so there is a way for me to look through my list and see where people are and try to match them up with you in a way that protects both your privacy and their privacy. But as for an actual system, we don't have that yet. Okay, so you said it wasn't a discussion, it's a place to share. How can you tell the difference? Sarah, that's a great question, because sometimes there isn't a difference. It's subtle, I'd say. So sharing is where I'm coming from today. So if we were to do honor my mortality and the mortality of all, my sharing would probably tell you that I've lost a lot of people who are really close to me. And that grief, my own personal grief, was an entry point into this work, and that sometimes I have trouble knowing what my individual grief is versus the collective grief. That would be a share. The discussion part of it would be that you would not respond to me directly. You know, my wife, Amy, wouldn't say like, oh, Laura, I hear what you're saying and I want to validate that and blah, 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 blah. We don't want that discussion part. And so what we do in our groups in the most recent rounds that we've been facilitating is we ask people to say thank you, or I hear you, or some sort of validation after that person shares for their 3 minutes or their 4 minutes or whatever amount of time you allot. So the sharing could become a discussion, but we don't want it to be. And so it's really that person talking from their own personal experience and where their heart's at. And then everybody validates them. Thank you, I hear you, I see you. And then that prevents the discussion from me saying, oh, what you said, that was really great, or that was really painful to hear, you know, how can I be helpful for you? Those kinds of discussions are helpful for after the meeting. And I know it's really subtle, and I know it's almost difficult to know the distinction, but basically you just don't want to create a place for someone to rant a lot. I think that there might always be a little bit of ranting because of the situation that we're in culturally. We feel powerless and then we want to rant. But if we're able to just say, where are you coming from? What are your experiences? How do you see this question? Share from that place, then that tends to be a little helpful. How do you see this as connected with the positive deep adaptation work? That's a great question. So the Good Grief Network is just one little tiny piece of the puzzle. There is so much work available in so many ways we can invest our energy and our time. And so what the Good Grief Network tries to do is, if you're interested, you know, we'll share our links to other organizations that are doing very important work. And positive deep adaptation is based off of Jem Bendel's work. I don't know if you folks have seen that, but he wrote a paper probably about a year ago. And now they have a very big Facebook presence, and they're out in the world. They work pretty closely with Extinction Rebellion. And so it's a way to get engaged. The way that I see this work is really an initial jumping off point if you want to start deconstructing social norms and cultural norms and our expectations of the world. This is the initial work to do if you want to be open to navigating the world. I see something like positive deep adaptation or Extinction Rebellion as next steps, you know, because then you have the 10 steps as your tools in your tool belt, and then you want to go out into the world and make a difference. You know, you don't want to just sit and ruminate on your feelings. You want to be empowered to make change. And so positive deep adaptation, or the work that reconnects, you know, they are programs to help you get deeper, and they're programs to help you turn outward. And yeah, I mean, I see all this work as incredibly important and interrelated in this time and space. Next question. Would it be better to start with physical meeting, or could it be possible to start with an online meeting? That's a great question. And I'm going to answer that question by answering a different question as well. So some of our participants and facilitators have said that step one is really hard to start with. Step one is just asking people to go too deep, too fast. And I have mixed feelings about that. I think what some people have done, especially in starting just recently, is they do a sort of pre-meeting. And so that's where they'll go over the expectations and norms. They'll go over the structure of the meetings. And that allows everybody to see other people, to see that there's a community who wants to talk about this, to start to sink in. And then on the second meeting really becomes your first step meeting. Now, Pietro's question about a physical meeting versus an online meeting, I would always say physical meeting. And that's because in this time and place, we need to learn who our neighbors are. We need to learn how to trust the people around us. We need to know that if we're feeling a lot of despair, we can call someone and go out for coffee or for cake or something like that. If you're doing everything digitally, it's a great way because it's still creating space for this heavy dialogue, but you really want that person-to-person connection. And I think that, it's absolutely essential that we meet people in the physical realm. Obviously, if people are really busy and can't always make it to a physical meeting, then digital is great too. But really, our main goal is to start building community. You know, if we have a natural weather event that takes out our house or flooding in our area where we need help, we want to know that we have people who are near to us that we can call on for help. That's my answer. Do we have more questions?
Wave.
Is there a list of current meetings?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
This is Pat. Okay. I have two questions kind of related to your talk. First of all, you referenced a facilitator training, but you didn't explain that I heard. And the other is, do you see the meetings as being closed or open meetings? And you talked about people dropping in and whatever. And I think if you have a closed meeting, sometimes you get deeper participation, but an open meeting is good if people know each other. So I'm just kind of wondering what your opinion on that is.
Yeah, great question. So the first one, facilitator training. Quite honestly, we haven't had an actual training yet. So because this is such a small network, we started so small, Amy and I don't actually have that many resources.
Okay.
So it would take a lot of money and a lot of time to put on a facilitator training, which is why I'm trying to do these kinds of things once a month, is so that we can gather and problem solve together. Down the road, what I would love to do is be able to host like a workshop, like a weekend workshop facilitator training, but we're just not at that capacity yet.
Right. It's very expensive too. It's very expensive to hold one, and you know, I think people are not traveling as much, and I mean, there's all kinds of reasons. So okay, great. And then what about the closed open meetings?
Yeah, so closed to open meetings. This kind of depends on your format. So we have some participants who are up in British Columbia, and they've closed their meetings because they are working with a different nonprofit, and they just want the meetings to be open to that nonprofit specifically. And so that's an option, that's a choice that they've made. Other people choose to leave it open so that people can drop in at any time. And what I've noticed from doing this work, Amy and I have run through about 10 programs right now, is that as long as you have a solid cohort meeting, the same types of people showing up from step 1 to step 10, that other people can drop in and still sync to that level. And so what I've noticed is that if you want to allow drop-ins, it's not necessarily going to detract from the openness and the vulnerability that already exists, as long as you have a stable group of people who are meeting regularly.
Okay. All right. So and it would depend on who I would be working with too, you know, what their preference is. So thank you. That's great.
Yeah, you're welcome. Next question. Do we have sample posters and promo materials? Another great question. So I have that one that I showed you in the presentation. Basically what we do is we give you our logo if you want to use it, and then say you can make a poster however you want. We can share with you the other posters that have been created through other folks who are facilitating and have created their own things. And then as far as promo materials, if you would like and you've purchased our manual, I'm happy to give you the participant packet that I give our participants that we just created for our last round. So this includes the steps and the little blurb that we have with our steps. It includes where you can find all of your resources at, and some quotes, and then just some journal topics. And I'd be happy to share that with you folks as well, if you would like it, because then it helps people. Like, people really like packets, even if they don't print them off and hold them. They like to have something to help guide them through the process. All right. Next question. What have you or other facilitators found to be most challenging in facilitating these 10 steps? I'm going to answer that one without reading further. Okay. Well, I'll read the whole thing. Also, how do you recommend holding space for people who are at vastly different levels, places of understanding, and where we're at, and how to respond? In other words, any tips on how to meet people in a group who have very different experience in this? So that's a great question, Holly. So the most challenging part of facilitating this work is, well, as a facilitator, you want to be able to drop into the space of vulnerability and sharing as well. You want to model that for people. And so the hardest part for me is removing the hierarchy and still participating, but still trying to keep time so that people don't go over, and still trying to provide these resources. You're doing two roles at once. You're being a participant and a facilitator. And for me, that's been the hardest part, because as a facilitator, your mind is not always right in your personal space, and you want to share from that place of integrity and vulnerability. And that's been my most difficult thing. I know one of our other facilitators actually had to ask someone to not come back, and that was the hardest part that facilitator had to experience. And that is what prompted us to create the expectations and norms, the sort of rules for showing up. That way we can hold people accountable and ask them to come back if they're being really disruptive or racist or hateful, whatever behavior they're doing that is so harmful to the group and needs to not exist anymore. Then you have to talk to that person. And so I imagine for many of us, especially if we're doing this work, we're sensitive to feelings, and we're sensitive to how people are showing up, and we want to be respectful and compassionate. So for many, that might be the hardest part, is actually cutting people off or asking people to leave, but always and as for sitting in a room with different places of understanding, I think this is a really important question. So you're going to have a lot of people who are coming who are at a different understanding of the severity of the predicament, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a great thing. And even in our expectations and norms, we address this. We say people are coming from different places. And so what we're trying to do is create a safe space for you to share where you're at without you pushing your beliefs onto somebody else. And so, there's a whole spectrum of responses to this predicament. One is, angry nihilism, like we're all fucked, we're all gonna die. There's absolutely nothing we can do about it. And then on the opposite end, there's this optimistic, like techno fix. We're going to find something to suck all the carbon out of the air, and we're all going to end up being okay, even though some people are already suffering. Like there will be no more because we're smart and we'll figure it out. What we try to do, and we try to read this in our intro, is find some place in the middle to come together. And so you can hold those feelings about we're fucked and everybody sucks and humans are inherently evil, but you can't use this as a space to be escapist. You can't penalize a sect of the population. You can't say it's because of Black people or gay people. You can't be xenophobic. You can't be racist. And so as long as people are coming to their conclusions with a certain amount of respect and compassion, they can have whatever feelings they want. It's when they start scapegoating sects of the population and saying it's because of these people or these people, then that creates a really unhealthy norm. And so from my experiences, each of our groups has had people at different levels of understanding. And what we say when we wrap up is basically whatever somebody has shared is coming from their perspective. You can take what you like and leave the rest. If it fits your current worldview, that's great. And if it doesn't, then don't take it. Don't internalize it. Don't bring it into you and integrate it. Instead, just sit with it and just know that that's where that person is. And that's been a really helpful model for us. What are some ways of getting the word out? If you use flyers, where are good places to put them out? So good ways of getting the word out. We talk about this a lot in our groups, taking a break from social media because it's quite toxic. But Facebook and Instagram and Twitter are really great organizing tools. And so I use them, and I also simultaneously hate them. And so getting the word out is helpful to put it on Facebook. I would not recommend promoting your thing. I would not pay Facebook to help you promote your event for a number of reasons. One, do we want to be paying Facebook? And two, when you promote for your area, it ends up getting a lot of people who aren't necessarily ready for this level of conversation yet. And so, one, you promote it, you use your own Facebook account and put the word out however you see fit. 2, we can help you by putting it into our emails and by putting it on our own Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. 3, flyers, as you mentioned, are really big, and it kind of depends on where your local areas are. You know, coffee shops are a great place. Who are you spending time with? Do you have coworkers who might be interested? Do you know if your coworkers know other people who might be interested? And so a lot of this tends to be word of mouth. You know, talking to people, just showing up in your normal day-to-day. You know, are you part of a book club? Are you part of a comedy club? You know, who are you interacting with in your day-to-day that you could invite and come? And the thing is that for our first couple groups, recruitment was difficult because this is perceived as such a weird experience. And so if your group is really small to begin with, if you have 5 people, that's okay. You know, there will be an emergence of experience and passion and insight, even with 5 people. So those are some of my suggestions. But yes, if you run a group, let us know, because then we can put it on our Facebook. And as we're growing, more people are coming, or I meant website, but as we're growing, more people are coming to our website and looking for a list of the places that are meeting. All right, how do you deal with different perceptions of reality? Some people may think we're almost doomed. Okay, so this is kind of the same question we addressed earlier. Like, other people are coming from different levels of understanding, and that's fine. I think we can sit with people with all ranges of expectations and feelings and in understanding of the predicament. The part that's difficult is when that person tries to press their understanding of reality onto someone else. And so that is also going back to the question of, are we having a discussion here? Or are we allowing people to share from their heart space and from what they understand? And the thing is that we can make it clear, if you see that someone is starting to try to push their energy into, push their perspective onto someone else, then you can pull them aside. And as a facilitator, it's your duty to pull them aside and say, you know, it's really wonderful that you're so passionate about this, but also it's not your place to inform others. You know, we have a whole bunch of recommended resources that you can look at. And if you would like to contribute some resources, I'd be happy to include it. And then people can look at these resources on their own. But you do not have to pass your belief or your understanding of what reality is. I would go back to the fruit of the step always. What are we here to talk about? Are we here to talk about embracing our mortality? Are we here to talk about doing our inner work? Are we here to talk about doing or taking breaks and learning how to do self-care? And I think those will help ground the conversation. But again, you might have to pull someone aside and say, this is not a place for you to rant. This is not a place for you to shape others' beliefs, but to be witnessed in your own belief. All right. All right. Are there any additional questions that I might be able to help you with? We have some time left.
Can I ask a question? I guess one direct question is, are you and Amy going to be offering any more groups online? I think you said you were sort of phasing that out. And part of my motivation is I haven't walked through the steps in a group for myself, and would love to do that. And at the same time, I'm also prepared in the small town I live in to see if I can gather a group of people simply so that I can be among them to walk through the steps together. But if you have any thoughts about that, that would be great. And then I have a second question, but I'll hold that till you respond.
Yeah, well, it's a great question. And our initial desire was to carry people through the steps first and then empower them to do the steps. But to be quite honest, we're trying to write a book right now. And so it's really hard to carry this space and then write a book. And then in addition to that, we live so remotely right now that we don't have internet access. Mm-hmm. And so like today I had to travel 45 minutes just to get to a library where I can have a meeting. And then we will have our step 10 tonight with a few other cohorts. But this library closes before that meeting is even done. And so basically it's a technological issue that I'm having right now to be able to facilitate more steps. And so we're choosing to invest more of our energy in helping other people start groups, and then also writing our book so that we can get more awareness to help other people start their own programs. But I hear you. I hear the want to go through the steps, you know, before leading them, because it makes sense that it might be a little bit intimidating. I think that what might be the best way forward, and anybody who's been in our groups knows this about me and Amy, is we just try to be transparent that we're human beings and we're limited, and we're just trying to do this thing and put it into the world so that we can calm our nervous systems and so that others will have the opportunity to do the same. And so I think if you organize with an understanding and telling people that you're a human being and that you're fallible and that you might be a little clumsy, people will be forgiving because of the space that you're creating and how much it will help them. And then also, you know, if you want to have a one-on-one with me and we can talk about some of these things, then I would love to help you do that too. Because it is a little scary, and I know that. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I mean, in some ways, what I really do want to do is move out of the expert role where I've lived in my working life. And so I recognize that just owning my place as a learner and wanting to be in the company of others and exploring this is probably a good practice for me. So it's not a total breakdown. The second question, and it doesn't have to be addressed, I'm just curious. You said there were people in the group here today who've been through the 10 steps with you, and I just love to hear of one or another person's movement. Or just hear some people share maybe one way in which they moved through that time and something changed for them. Just to hear a couple of first-hand accounts, if there's time and people are interested.
Yeah, folks who have been through the program, do you feel comfortable sharing?
I can say something.
Thank you.
I think it's been very simply facilitated. There's almost no interventions from Laura and Amy, other than they share their own experience. They're members of the circle, which is lovely. And because what it communicates is that this is a process, and you can go through these steps 100 times and you're going to get something deeper. It's sort of like reading the Bible annually, you know, you're going to get something deeper. Not that I read the Bible annually, but I know people who do. Yeah, and then I think it was so simple, and somehow all the participants went really deep. It was very interesting, and I came to count on the different perspectives that we had in the class. You know, I got to know sort of the point of view of people, not that they were repetitive, but that we had so many different eyes on the circumstance. I think everybody in our group, we have our last one tonight, is quite deep into accepting the reality of climate chaos. You know, we don't have any dissenters or doubters in the group. They're just people who are really wanting to look, you know, be better equipped psychologically to be present and to be supportive of others. I'm going to do a group locally. So that's, I don't know if that's helpful, but it's, I've really, really, really appreciated this process. And the intelligence behind it. It is controlled. It's not freewheeling, even though there's opportunity to improvise. It feels like very well thought through. So it's something I can say. Hi, Julia.
Thank you. Did another participant want to also speak on behalf of what happened to them in the process?
Well, I can say I really appreciated how many different perspectives there are on this issue. So it helped me a lot to see how different people react differently to this situation, and in a way that helped me to understand that my worst feelings were always to be relative to the situation. I mean, I knew that there were different paths, different point of views, and I could always think that there was another way of seeing the situation, and so not getting stuck in anxiety or depression or so, because everything is so moving constantly, and that helps a lot to have a community sharing their feelings.
Thank you, Pietro. Appreciate that. I'll leave one more second open to see if anybody else wants to share their perspective, and if not,
I'd be glad to. I was with Pietro for the meetings, and it was really great to be heard, to be a part of a group of people that are listening, and that a lot of the healing that I felt came from that interaction, sort of consistent interaction, that I found to be the most helpful.
thank you, Chris. Appreciate that.
Wonderful. Thank you for your sharings. Very helpful.
All right. Do we have additional questions? Oh, there was one here that wasn't addressed. Oh. Sorry, go for it.
Can I ask? Oh, it's just real quick. I mean, in your different experience in having it every week versus every other week.
You're cutting out a little bit, and so I didn't quite.
I'll turn off my video. Has there been experience in having it every week versus every other week, and is there a difference in terms of how things get attenuated between those two kinds of schedules?
Yeah, that's a good question. So most of the ones that Amy and I have done, we meet every week, and then we've had to take a few week breaks just because of personal reasons. And so, excuse me, I personally like the format of every week. One of our other organizers in Utah was doing every other week because that was his capacity. That's how much he was able to meet and how much time he was able to dedicate to this. And what I know is that for many of our participants, they look forward to meeting every week. And so again, I mean, I think it's even better for me to have that follow through every week. You know, every week we know we're meeting at noon or at 5 or something. And so we come to expect that. But I think that if you set the expectation that even if we meet once a month, these people they know they're going to come together in community, and they know they're going to talk about these types of things. And so I think just as long as you set that expectation, we're meeting every other week, we're meeting once a month, we're meeting every week, that's really what helps build that container. Is, you know, you're the one that's setting the tone. And in some ways, because the steps are so dense, you know, there's so much in each of them, perhaps it's better to meet every other week or once a month. Then it really lets people settle in. But for me, I found it most helpful to meet weekly. Like, it just helps me be more accountable. It helps me be more present. It helps me work on myself and this issue a lot more. And when I'm not hosting these meetings, when I'm not participating in these circles, I realize that my despair tends to get stoked a little easier because I don't have that grounding presence. And then one of the questions in the chat says, is it acceptable to try to draw the line between personal background that leads us to feel in a particular way and the feelings that are activated by the climate crisis, trying to separate them? It also another wonderful question. And I think the truth and the reality is that, Even if we tried to draw a line between the personal and the collective, we cannot. Because how we come to understand the climate crisis or any of these systemic issues is from our own personal experience. And so in our intro, we say something along the lines of, you know, we're not here to work through our problems per se, our individual problems, but instead we're here to be witnessed on our journey. And I think that's a good way of phrasing it, is because part of my journey in being right here and right now is the desperation and helplessness and hopelessness I felt with regard to climate. And that is a direct result of the abuses I suffered as a kid. And so I can't parse those out. You know, I can become wiser, I can learn my triggers, I can learn what I'm projecting onto the world. But at the end of the day, my personal life and the collective are very intertwined. And so you'll come to learn people's stories and people's perspectives and how they came to be very concerned about the world in which we're living. And I don't think we need to say like, nope, that's too personal, you can't share that. But instead say like, oh, well, you wouldn't say this as a facilitator because we don't want to have discussions. But, you know, in my mind, when somebody shares something, you're like, oh, that's how they got to this path. You know, like they experienced a loss or they experienced a trauma that really woke them up to this world. And so what's really helpful is allowing that space for people to share from that heart place region. And you can see, I mean, you don't have to be a therapist. You don't have to understand how people are projecting their things. But the danger that comes is when my despair becomes so heavy that I'm trying to push it off on you and I'm trying to rant and I'm trying to blame. That's not helpful. And so we're trying to draw the line there, not necessarily with our own personal background and our understanding of the collective problem, because we're trying to create space for people to be witnessed on this journey of theirs. And they got there somehow. And I think that's important for all of us to understand how we got to this place. You know, how are we understanding the severity of the predicament versus our neighbor who doesn't even want to look at the problem? What happened in our life to wake us up to this? I think that's an important question. All right, I am checking my chat and there's nothing else there. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, I'll invite everyone to take a very collective deep breath, very deep, very collective. And see if there's anything else that we have a burning desire to bring up in this group setting. And then if there is nothing else, then we'll wrap up and I'll start trying to plan for a November meeting, which will not have the presentation. We'll only have access to this sort of format where we ask questions and try to come to a consensus about the best way to move forward. Thank you, Holly. Thank you, Sarah. All right.
Thank you so much, Laura.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you folks for being here. I'm so grateful for all of you and your interest. And as I mentioned, you are so welcome to email with me and I will try to respond. Most of the time it'll be from my phone, so they'll be a little shorter in nature. And then, you know, just give us some time to respond. But if you have more pressing questions and you're ready to get started, let's meet, you know, for an hour. I'll come to the library and we'll, you know, try to figure out what we need to do to get you guys mobilized and empowered and have all the resources you need to do what you need to do. So thank you. Thank you for your time and your heart. Cheers.